Welcome to California Consumer Privacy Act CCPA topic. We all know CCPA has been in effect since January 1st, 2020. And there are a couple of things that we want to talk about CCPA during this session. First thing is, we hear this a lot, that my business doesn't have to be located in California. That's why I'm not impacted by CCPA, but that's not true. Who does it get impacted to? So if your annual gross revenue exceeds $25 million, it does impact you. If you buy or sell personal information of 50,000 or more California consumers, or actually devices, so that's the tricky part. If you're an IoT company based out of Delaware, it does impact you as well. And the last is if you sell California residents' data more than 50%, it does impact you as well. And Jason is going to go into these details a lot more than what I just explained. My name is Victor Monga. I work for VMware based out of Palo Alto, California. I'm also a leader and volunteer for a couple of non-profit organizations such as ISAC Orange County Chapter, Cloud Security Alliance, LA Chapter, or Virtually Testing. I won't talk more about myself. If you are interested in learning more about me, please connect me over LinkedIn and or Twitter. I want to briefly talk about and introduce ISAC Orange County Chapter as well. We believe in three things. We're here to serve you, our members. So we provide you certification trainings. We also provide you events every month so that you can stay up to date with our current industry going on. So about cybersecurity, information security, compliance security, we bring speakers from all over the world that talks about these things. And the last is networking. As a local chapter, we encourage everyone to connect with each other, staying in touch with your industry leaders, industry peers. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason James. I'm a past president and current governor of ISAC Orange County, and the owner of a small business called Regency Park out of Orange County, who focuses on small to medium-sized businesses in the IT security and compliance space. Okay, so we have an agenda. My goal in the next 30 minutes is to talk a little bit about how some of the small businesses, and as was mentioned, not necessarily California businesses, are dealing with CCPA. Not everyone is a large multinational. Not everyone has millions of dollars to achieve their objective of full compliance with CCPA. Some of the small businesses, startups, some that are not even aware of what California requires under this regulatory standard. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how some of those small businesses are addressing this need. I have a three-phase presentation that you can see here on the screen, and I'm going to go through that next. So CCPA may migrate to CPRA. I think you've probably heard about this in previous presentations today. It's not in stone, but I think it has a significant impact on the standard. I've left here in the presentation a link that will take you to the proposed updates, but of course, if you are planning to undertake CCPA, I highly recommend that you start reading up on the CPRA standards now, because it may be that the current version expires before you undertake the program. So I put a little note here. It's a quote from Winston Churchill. Some of you may have noticed my accent. I'm from England, not Australia. And for those of you who have met me, you already know that. But he made this statement that 10,000 regulations destroy all respect for the law. I think in the case of the US, as we've probably seen, regulations come and go on a regular basis, both that are at a federal level and at a state level. And California has been extremely good at implementing regulations that help our air, that control our environment, but also that can control the consumer's ability to manage their data. And I think if you took away some of those regulations, or if you tried to reverse out some of those, we may be back to what we considered the wild, wild west of sort of data management, and unfortunately probably resulted in a lot of the data losses that we've seen in the past. Okay, so let's take a look at phase one. We've got three different steps here. We're going to cover privacy notices and policies, update third-party processing agreements, and training.
So Jason, I have a good question for you before we move into the next one. how many people updated their privacy notices and policies for them, and what that process looks like for them, and what did they do after that?
That's a really good question. A lot of organizations, well, so first of all, why do we do our privacy notices and policies? It's a requirement under CCPA that we notify consumers of our intention, to provide privacy. And we do that in a way by we update our website with these notifications and policies, and we make them very easy for the consumer to read and understand, or we should make them easy for the consumer to read and understand, and that's not always the case. But in the case of CCPA, there are a number of maybe let's just say law firms or less scrupulous lawyers who are trolling the internet, looking at businesses, going to their privacy webpage, and basically ascertaining whether that privacy statement is written with CCPA in mind, or whether it's maybe a legacy statement that just talks about general privacy. If the organization doesn't address CCPA in the correct way, then and that lawyer or law firm determines that the company should comply with CCPA, that makes them a very easy target for, maybe a frivolous lawsuit, or maybe something that has a little bit more substantial teeth. So businesses typically undertake the privacy notices and policies first. And in some cases, you'll find that that's the only activity that they've actually done towards CCPA, while they still consider the cost and enormity of the project as a whole. So getting your privacy notices and policies not only obviously addresses one of the key requirements, but it's also a very important aspect of protecting your business from some of these frivolous lawsuits. In the slide here, I've got some examples of the privacy policy sections. And again, the intention here is to help small businesses achieve these activities in a relatively fast and effective way. There are some great software products out there. And if you want to find out more, you can always reach out to me at a later date. There's some good software products that will automate this, almost from a wiki point of view. But as I've said in the example here, we're looking for personal information collected, disclosed, and sold. That's extremely important. If you're selling data, that's one of the categories that requires you to fall under CCPA. What sort of information you're collecting. And you don't necessarily have to tell them the specific data points or the data fields, but you do need to summarize. Whether you're selling, sharing, or disclosing that personal information to any other person. The California privacy rights and how to exercise them. It's really important that when you're writing policies like this, you're making it very clear and very easy to a layman to understand. Because if someone comes onto your website and it's all legalese, and they have no way of interpreting it, and only a lawyer could interpret the statements, then you will still fall foul of CCPA, because you're not really providing a consumer with information that is meaningful to them. How to contact you, your organization, and how the consumer can exercise their rights, which we'll talk about a little later on, and how they should expect you to handle their requests. Is it going to be email, a phone call, a website, etc.? So we want to make sure that these privacy policies are effective and that they do comply with the regulation. There's also a cookie policy. Now, while cookies are considered a technical, IT-based software product that is used for, maybe marketing or improving, a website's capability, you do need to call them out, because if you're capturing information via cookies, that is capturing consumer information that falls under the CCPA standard. So there's an expectation. You can either build it into your privacy policy or have a separate cookie policy. That I recommend a separate one, because by stripping that out, you're not confusing a consumer who has no understanding or interest in what a cookie is, or analytics, or remarketing behavior. If you bury that into your CCPA, you may end up making it too difficult for the consumer to understand.
So,
and some sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, one thing that I know a lot of companies, they always struggle with vendor management. And for smaller companies, it's starting to become a problem, or starting to become something that they are focusing on. How does CCPA changes that vendor management for smaller companies, or even for larger companies?
That's a very good question. One of the things So smaller businesses typically outsource a lot of their services earlier on because it's more effective to outsource it to a business that already has all of the technology, all the capabilities in place, and just pay a bill rather than build those processes internally. The difficulty with outsourcing is you're typically sharing information with those vendors, whether that's just for sales or marketing. I just want the vendor to send a letter to my customers, or send an email, or capture, perform a survey for me. But by sharing the consumer's information with that vendor, I'm now requiring that vendor to comply with CCPA. And as you can see from my update third-party processing agreement slide, there's an expectation that you communicate with that vendor your understanding of their requirements under CCPA. I need to know, for example, if I send a name and address of my customer, or a list of names and addresses of my customers, to a third party, and that third party then reaches out and buys some additional information to substitute or to complement that information that I've provided, either to validate addresses or to find out a little bit more about that consumer for marketing purposes, then that information all falls under the CCPA, and I need to know what is being bought, what is being used, what is being sold. I can then ultimately update my contract with them, and I can make sure that they're staying in compliant, I'm staying compliant, and that when I'm communicating with my consumers, I'm including all information that is being stored, not necessarily just the information that's being stored on my computer equipment, on my cloud environment.
So Jason, I have one more question. So a lot of times I know CCPA has been seen this as a compliance issue, or it just goes with the compliance office of a bigger company, let's say. And now you mentioned about cookies, since it's a technical term, and now we also need to consider our IT security or the technical folks into this CCPA discussion. For the training part, how does a company actually have to strategize? Is it technical training? Is it a compliance training? Is it a both? How do they actually make sure that their staff is trained for CCPA, since it's actually pretty much bridges the gap between a compliance and technical folks? So tell us a little bit about that.
So there's a lot of training actually involved. We do have to secure, and I mentioned that briefly on a slide further down, but we do have to secure our environment. I mean, we are still under California law required to secure PII, PHI, PCI, and a variety of other different data standards. So we do want to include security training. We do also want our employees to understand what CCPA means, and it's more importantly, of course, if that employee is managing consumer data, or is an administrator of consumer data, they have to understand what the requirements state with regards to that handling of data. If they are imaging a drive, and they're moving it into another location, that clearly would impact your capabilities to be CCPA compliant, because now I'm replicating data in new locations that I wasn't aware of. So you wouldn't want that to happen. You would want to make sure that whatever your employees do stays within the realms of CCPA compliance. Also, of course, if you're managing the opt-in, opt-out processes, and your employees are involved in responding to consumers, we want to make sure that they, again, are trained on the best way to communicate, whether it's phone, email, and that they stay within the parameters of your CCPA program. So there is quite a lot of relevant training. And of course, again, as we all know, if a standard changes, as it's very possible this one will, we need to retrain them based on any revisions that were made to the standard as a whole. So we're going to look at phase 2, updating data inventories, business processes, and data strategies, and making recommendations to security updates. Under the update data inventories, business processes, so we talked about policies and procedures, and we talked about training, but of course, what's most important is understanding the data that you have and where it is. If you're a small business, it's possible that you're maintaining that information in the cloud, on servers in maybe a local data center or a remote data center, maybe on laptops and USB sticks. And we see it everywhere. I mean, data is stored in a multitude of locations, including, of course, as I described before, vendors. To undertake CCPA, if you leave the data in all those different locations and you're a very decentralized, outsourced type of business, which a lot of small businesses are, that makes it extremely hard to, one, understand what sort of data you've got and where it is, and who is handling it, but also to respond to the various queries that a consumer can make. Larger organizations will typically attempt to centralize that data. It may be an expensive upfront activity, but in the long run, to maintain compliance, and to say that you're compliant, you probably need to centralize your data and make sure that the data is handled specifically in line with the standard. For small businesses, again, you do have to go through, even though you may hold less data, you have to go through exactly the same process of identifying what data you've got on consumers, how it's being used and where it's being stored, and creating some sort of data inventory or data dictionary that you can then use for responding to consumers' queries.
So Jason, on that topic about data inventory, I know we always talked about in security that we should have our inventory of the hardware, inventory of the softwares. And now it seems like with the compliance like CCPA, we must have inventory of our data and proper labels. I think the DLP is going to become crucial given these kind of compliance CCPA, because without DLP, data loss prevention, or even detection, we won't be able to even detect that if there's a data leaks or not. And especially for smaller businesses, smaller organizations, data is everywhere, as you mentioned, laptops, thumb drives, hard drives, it's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, we do assume DLP is a great security product, but you're right. In the CCPA, it would prevent someone from accidentally taking a sizable portion of consumer data from a CRM, putting it on a USB so that they could then take it home and work on their computer during a pandemic, which of course is a very realistic scenario. If that was the case, then that potentially could significantly impact my CCPA program. So as a small business, where you have less controls and less understanding of data mapping, data control, data protection, and data security, it becomes invaluable to create these databases, or really these data tracking activities that prevent your information from leaving. And if that's DLP, then I think that's a great product. It's something that I think Microsoft bundles and can be used on email, etc. So that would be a great approach.
Yeah. And I think I also encourage and probably ask you, how would you suggest to small businesses to understand when we talk about PII, personal identifiable information, what does that mean? If someone is using cookies, first name, last name, email, yes, that's PII. Or if someone is using first name, last name, addresses, yes, that's PII. Because most of the time people do realize only PHI or PCI, credit card information, or my social security is what I need to protect. But not really with the compliance like CCPA. We also need to worry about PII. How are you using it? You might be using targeted ads. You might be using some marketing strategy to target a region or a geolocation. All of that needs to be protected given CCPA now, if you're collecting that for California residents.
Yeah, you're right. Most standards will give you a very clear and concise description of the type of data. CCPA is probably not as clear because it's a regulation, or rather than something you can was written by an IT certified privacy expert. So we typically have the rule that if you can tie that information back to a consumer, if it's scrubbed or anonymized, then it's probably okay at source. But if you can tie it back to a consumer, including the cookie tracking data, then it falls under CCPA. There are privacy lawyers, of which we've probably heard of a few today, who are extremely good at looking at your data and giving you a very clear picture. And of course, there are consulting firms like myself that have the same skill sets, who would analyze this information from the various sources and pull it together from your vendors, your databases, your cloud environments, and give you a good understanding of what is out of scope. And that's a mandatory step, because when we get to the next area, which is communicating with the consumer, you have to give them accurate responses. You can't say, well, I have a little bit of your name and a little bit of your address and a little bit of your, social security and bank information. You have to be concise. So this activity of identifying and knowing where your data is and what it is and whether it ties back to a consumer is a mandatory and very necessary step. On the next slide, I've got some simple data tracking sheet, and this is just a suggestion. It's it's not exhaustive, but we are very interested in the types of applications you're using. It's very possible that you're using a third-party cloud application that, such as a CRM, that an example would be Salesforce, that's storing information that falls in scope. It could be a payroll solution for your employees, depending on how you're structured. It could be a marketing company, and of course, it could just be your own databases, your own spreadsheets, your own USB, your own laptops. So we want to know what the what the URLs are, the purpose of the data, whether it's an input or an output, whether it's PII, yes or no. We want to know description of the process, so we can understand why you're using this information, because again, that's key to CCPA and the understanding of the purpose of the use of the data, which you will need to put into your policies and your privacy notices. We obviously want to flag that data, whether it's CCPA or not, because as we try to maintain this compliance, information will be added and removed, and the relevance of that information may change. And then, of course, whether those applications that you're using are already CCPA compliant. There's a lot of products. In fact, there's a lot of cookies out there, such as Google cookies, that are already considering CCPA, and you can actually research them, and you'll find that they already provide a CCPA compliant link that you can read up on, and contacts. So this is just some examples of a tracking sheet that I would put together to start this data mapping exercise.
Yeah, one thing, Jason, I was going to bring it up for a lot of companies. First of all, like, you want to know which sector you're in, and you want to look at your other organizations in your sector or vertical. So if you are a telecommunication company, you want to look at what you're collecting as a telecom company, because maybe as an executive, you might not even know what you're collecting, and that might be from a California resident. That is going to impact you for CCPA. If you are a company for IoTs, especially IoTs get sold all over. And those information, you always ask for first name, last name, and maybe email address for the updates. So maybe I can put the pictures on my refrigerator, or I can put songs or my favorite on my digital photo album. If I have first name, last name, maybe an address for shipping is stored on that IoT, that is gonna impact as a CCPA. So make sure, if you're one of those organizations, know what you're collecting.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the least obvious but most common things I come across is small businesses with a form of customer service, and that's done through the telephone, because it's a quick, rapid response. And they've spent a lot of time and energy understanding their data mapping for databases and cloud solutions, but they never considered the fact that during a conversation, they're asking a whole load of sort of specific questions around the customer that they're dealing with, and then the problem that they're addressing. And they have built up a long recording, cloud-based recording of consumer data that they then had to go back and analyze or destroy, depending on, of course, what their risk appetite is, but then go back and analyze so that they can work out whether it's something that should be included under CCPA.
Exactly. That's another point. If, as a California resident, I reach out to a company and tell them that I don't want you to have my data anymore, please delete it, you better have the procedures, process, and policies ready to execute on that request. Because how are you going to take one row out of that table and delete it? And where does that delete go? Is it going to be permanently deleted, or is it just going into trash and maybe can be recovered later on? What are those procedures look like? So be prepared for that, because this is coming.
Yeah. And then not many small businesses have the exceptions that a larger company. I have a couple of car manufacturers as clients, and they have a whole exclusion around their warranty and and lemon laws that allow them to exclude a whole lot of data elements because of that. But most small businesses, everything falls in scope. So the next slide I have is the security updates. Victor, you asked about security, and I think it's right. We do take a risk-based approach. So unlike PCI or HIPAA or COVID or ISO, which is sort of control based. This is a little higher level. We're taking that risk-based approach to the protection of data, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal information. There's no specific language around it, how you should secure the data, but obviously my recommendation is to work with either your own internal IT or with a consultant on best practices for security protection. There are a lot of great standards out there that could be implemented at the same time as CCPA, as a 2-for-1 sort of activity. Not only would it decrease the likelihood of a data loss, which would obviously impact you the same way. You would have to contact all of these consumers the same way that California law requires you to. But obviously, it would have a significant reduction of reputational risk, etc., especially for a small business trying to work their way up in the in their marketing capabilities, etc. Okay, so phase 3, implement protocols to ensure consumer rights. So in this area, this is where we focus. So we understand what data we have. We're securing it. We've notified our consumers through our website, on our privacy rules, and we've told them what information we're capturing from them. Now we have to give them the rights that they are being provided. And we have the notice, the right to delete, the opt-out notification, the one that ensures that no financial incentivization will change the way that we deal with them. We don't discriminate against them. I've put on the slide here, and I've also put it in the past, that there are a lot of areas where general counsel or legal advice is imperative, and I think this is one of them. You want to make sure that none of your existing business practices could fall foul of these financial incentivization or discrimination acts. You don't want to penalize someone, for example, if someone comes into your product for free, and then you're trying to encourage them to become a paid customer. That should not impact their CCPA rights.
I was just going to take this opportunity and talk about how this can impact, and companies should start talking about in their marketing department. So if someone is asking for you to delete their information or do not have it, how are you going to make sure that you're still targeting that person to send your new updates or maybe new services? Also, based on that, you can't discriminate. If you can't tell a customer or a person that just because you asked me to delete your information, I'm not going to give you the same level of service. It's not going to work that way.
That's right. And a few of my clients are web service or web-based businesses that provide a service. And it's been difficult because as they've looked at the opt-out and the delete functions, they've realized that, by removing the consumer information, they cannot provide the service anymore. And what they've done as part of the notification process, which we'll look at a couple of slides just after this, they've said to the consumer, you have the total right to request these these opt-outs and these deletions. As a result of that, we will no longer be able to continue to provide this free or paid service to you. And that's for larger organizations. Again, they sometimes can use those as exclusions to the CCPA because that opting out would remove a service that's necessary because they're a consumer. They purchase something like the warranty for a TV or a car. But for most small online businesses, if it means that you can no longer provide the service that was described, you need to let that consumer know. And you have time to do that as part of your communication. You have 35, 45 days, and you can ask for extension. You can explain the ramifications, but as long as you're not doing it in a way that's perceived as trying to sway the consumer by saying, hey, don't do this deletion step because then I'm going to go away and delete all your information and you're going to be a loser. That is not accepted. You have to be clean and concise. And this is where your general counsel will be very helpful in explaining the language that you should and should not use. I put a couple of sub-steps here: consumer validation process and possible service, and consumer management, request to complete. We need to make sure that, there are these, we need to validate the consumer, so if you have a user ID and password, that's great because you can you can validate the consumer, authenticate the consumer through that process. But if you're providing a free website and you've never really provided any sort of security, you can't necessarily go back and start phoning them and refusing to perform the CCPA services because you are not able to authenticate. But you also have to protect the data and make sure that you're not allowing information to flow into incorrect hands. So there can be the difficulty of working out how to authenticate valid consumer requests. And again, that's something that I've had to work with on a number of different cases where we've had to create manual processes for authentication.
Yeah, one thing I was going to add to that is currently, so if you think about it, if someone is, or your California resident is asking you to delete the information, talk about the SLAs. How long would it take? What are the processes? And give that reasonable time, an estimated time or tentative time to them. So if I'm requesting you to delete my information today, at least I get an automated response from you that it's going to take whatever that days or time is, so that I'm not thinking that it's going to be deleted tomorrow or it's not going to be deleted right away. At least I can actually sit back and relax and wait until you tell me that that time has reached and you have deleted it. So make sure the SLAs within your organization is defined, and talk about those SLAs with technical teams. Because a lot of times it's blamed on technical team that, oh, they forgot to implement that one thing, or they forgot to put that into their CI/CD pipeline. Talk about those things up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure that when you identify your process, that it is in your privacy statement so that the consumer understands and has a manageable expectation of, as you said, Victor, timeline. There are requirements under CCPA on how long you should take on what's the maximum requirement for responding, and there are the opportunity to extend if this is a particularly difficult case where you have to do additional work to identify what the consumer's information, what consumer information you're storing on this individual. But definitely define that and manage that up front. In the next slide, which I've called protocol example, this is something that I put together with one of my clients. They're a online software company that provides services, and they developed some additional features in their account setting of the consumer's account setting. So in this case, the consumer has a user ID and password which they can log in on, and you can see that we added some features here that allow them to request what information do you have on me. Now, just to be clear, when a consumer says, what information do you have on me, you're not providing them with the actual data. You're not providing them with, when they say, name and address, your actual address, your actual data, you're providing them with a description of the types of data fields. So I have your name, I have your address, I have your phone number, your social security, your, mother's maiden name, etc., password, a user ID, and etc. So I'm not providing the actual data, just the definitions. So in this case, we built into the login account screen the ability to request, this consumer request the data that's being stored on them. And you'll see directly below that, below the blue area, we have the personally identifiable information purge request, which again, both of these are held behind authentication. So that made it a little easier for this customer to identify whether the request is valid. And then as we go to the next screen, this is actually an internal process request that was sent to the handler of the data, whether that's a call center or a DBA or whoever you may have assigned within the organization. And it's basically saying that, this individual has requested information that we are storing. And there's actually a note down the bottom there that says, just to be aware, there may be some marketing spreadsheets in a Google Drive that are actually stored currently, because that's the way we've structured our business, that may have consumer information on this person, Dan. So, this is information we know from the database: birthday, gender, last name, first name, etc. And but make sure that you go out there and research, any other forms of communication. Sorry, any other forms of data that consumer data that we may have on that individual. And then the next slide, this is a communication that we put together. So what we're doing is we're emailing back to the consumer saying, hey, you've requested purge. We understand that. Please note that using their application requires specific information. As you take that information away, we're probably not going to be able to provide you with the service. This is kind of, we were just talking about before. So, just to be clear, make sure that you're comfortable with deleting, and also, setting expectations that deleting may take up to 45 days. And in this case, a relatively small business with some manual processes, they do need a little bit of extra time to make sure that they are purging all of the relevant information in the various marketing databases and third parties. However, this company put a lot of effort into centralizing their data, consumer data, before creating this process, so that it became a lot simpler. But they did also put in a lot of effort into automating the process, so that requests are all done online, responses are done via email, and the purge process is automated as well. So this presentation was really, the goal of this presentation was to sort of talk about what small businesses can do, but you can apply pretty much any statement that Victor and I made to medium and large size businesses. However, large businesses typically have a lot of change before they undertake CCPA. So I just wanted to, we just wanted to make sure that no business is left behind, as this becoming more significant as the revisions to the standard are taking place. Okay, with that, I'll complete my presentation on CCPA for small business. Victor?
Yeah, thanks so much, James. That was insightful, and I'm sure a lot of our audience is actually enjoying this conversation and insights from you. I do want to take this opportunity and thank all of our volunteers and planners. It literally took a village to put together this event. It was not easy. A lot of volunteers and planners had to literally work around the clock to make this happen behind the scenes. So thank you, all of the volunteers, even planners, and special thanks to Cyber Alliances for providing us the virtual event and the platform to make this happen. Once again, thank you very much for being here. Thank you all the attendees, and we hope you enjoyed the event. Thank you very much.